The market of shame, the market smelled of oil, sweat, and fear. Bright lights hung from rusted chains, throwing sick yellow beams over the cages. Everywhere, voices shouted prices, laughing, bargaining, fighting for bodies. It was not a place for hope. It was a place where hope came to die. In the center row stood a cage that was different. Inside was a young alien woman. Her wrists chained, ankles bound with heavy iron. Her skin was pale but bruised, her eyes large but empty. She had been in cages so long that she no longer knew how it felt to walk without chains. The traders were loud, their words cruel. "She's not for work," one called out. "She's for pleasure, sell her by the weight." The crowd laughed, some making rude jokes. They saw her as meat, not a person. She kept her head down, in her mind. She told herself not to look at anyone. If you looked, they might take it as a sign of obedience, or worse, an invitation. Better to be invisible, better to be nothing. But then a shadow fell over her cage. She heard footsteps, calm, steady, not like the others. When she looked up, she saw a human. He was tall, broad-shouldered. His face marked with faint scars. He didn't stare at her body, he looked directly into her eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. Nobody here cared about her name. Names didn't matter in the market, only prices. The auctioneer laughed loudly. "Name." "She's just goods, call her whatever you want." The crowd joined in the laughter, but the human didn't laugh. He waited for her to answer. Her lips trembled. But no sound came. It had been so long since anyone had asked that she almost didn't remember her own name. When she stayed silent, the human turned to the auctioneer. "How much?" he asked. The man grinned. "Sold by weight, special price for you." "Human!" The bidding began. Shouts and numbers flying through the air. Most bidders dropped out quickly. They had no interest if he was buying. Finally, the auctioneer slammed his hand on the table. "Sold." He called out to the human. The chains rattled as the traders unlocked her cage. Her heart raced. She knew this part well. She would be pulled out, chained again, and dragged behind her new owner. It had happened so many times before, but this time, when the human reached for her, he didn't grip her roughly. He didn't put a leash on her neck. He simply said, "You're free to walk beside me." She stared at him, unsure if it was a trick. The traders behind them muttered insults. One shouted, "Better enjoy her. Human, she won't last long." The human ignored them completely. He didn't walk fast. He didn't drag her. He just walked as if they were equals. As they left the market, she felt the air change. The stink of sweat and oil faded into the smell of rain. The sound of shouting was replaced by the soft hum of the city outside. For the first time in years, she was outside a cage without a guard holding a weapon at her back. But her mind kept telling her this was impossible. She had been bought, just like before. No one bought someone like her without wanting something in return. Soon she thought he would show his true colors. They reached a small building at the edge of the port district. It was old but clean. The lights warm instead of harsh. Inside, he motioned to a bed in the corner. "You can rest here," he said. She froze, expecting him to lock the door or chain her ankle, but instead, he stepped to the other side of the room. He rolled out a thin mat on the floor and lay down himself. She didn't understand. Why would he give her the bed and take the floor? Was it another trick? Her mind was full of questions, but she was too tired to ask them. She sat on the edge of the bed. It was soft. Cleaner than anything she had touched in years. Her fingers gripped the blanket. A strange feeling crept into her chest. It was not trust, not yet, but it was something. She lay down carefully, keeping her eyes on him. He had already closed his eyes, breathing slow and steady in the darkness. She stared at the ceiling. The sound of the rain outside was soft and steady. For the first time in years, she was not in a cage. and she didn't know whether to feel safe or afraid. The purchase no one understood. Morning came slowly. The alien girl woke to the sound of footsteps outside the small building. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Her hands reached for the cold metal bars that had always been around her, but there were none. She sat up quickly, the blanket falling from her shoulders. The human was gone. Panic gripped her. Was this a trick? Had he sold her again while she slept? She rushed to the door, but it wasn't locked. She stepped outside into the thin morning mist. The human stood a few steps away, speaking to a street vendor. He handed over credits and received a small bundle. Wrapped in paper, when he saw her, he simply said, "Breakfast," and held it out. She took it slowly, expecting him to demand something before letting her eat. But he just turned back toward the building without another word. Inside, she opened the paper. The smell hit her first fresh bread and warm meat. Not the moldy scraps she had eaten before. Her stomach growled loudly. She ate quickly at first, then slowed, watching him. He didn't seem to notice he was busy cleaning an old piece of armor. The silence felt strange. Usually, an owner would talk, constantly giving orders, mocking her, or making demands. But he stayed quiet, almost as if her presence didn't need to be controlled. It made her uneasy. She had learned that kindness often came before cruelty. Later, they left the building. She walked a few steps behind him, out of habit. People stared, some in surprise, others in disgust. A woman whispered, "Why is he letting her walk free?" A man replied, "Humans are strange, they don't understand value." The girl's cheeks burned, but the human didn't react to any of it. They entered a small repair shop near the port. The human began speaking to the owner about starship parts. She stood quietly by the door. Her eyes scanned the wall shelves of tools, coils of wiring, and strange glowing crystals. It was all unfamiliar, but there was a certain order to it. Not like the chaos of the market. After buying a few parts, they headed to a hangar at the far edge of the district. Inside was a ship, small, old, but solid. The hull was scratched, the paint faded. The human set down the parts and began working. He didn't tell her to help, but she stepped closer anyway. "What is this?" she asked quietly. He looked up, a faint smile in his eyes. "Our way out." She froze at those words. "Our," she repeated. He nodded once, then went back to work. Her mind spun. She wasn't used to being included in anyone's plans. For so long, she had been cargo, property, a thing. Now, a single word had made her feel something else. That night, they stayed in the hangar. He gave her a small folded blanket and told her to sleep in the ship's cabin. He stayed outside, working late, the sound of tools echoing in the metal walls. She lay in the narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling. She didn't know if she should feel safe or if she was walking into another trap. Memories came, uninvited chains biting into her wrists, hands pulling her away from her home, voices laughing. As they weighed her, she curled into herself, trying to push them away. But the sound of his steady work was strange comfort. No shouting, no orders, no cruelty. Just the rhythm of repairs and the faint hum of a lamp. At one point, she peeked out of the cabin. He was sitting on the floor, back against the wall. A half-finished part in his hands. He looked tired. But there was a focus in his eyes. She wondered why he had bought her at all. If it wasn't for pleasure or work, then what? Before she could ask, he spoke without looking up. "Tomorrow. We'll need to get fuel. Then we can leave this place. Leave this place." The words felt like a dangerous dream. She had dreamed of freedom before, only to wake in worse chains than before. But something in his tone made it sound real. She went back to the cabin, lying down again. Her eyes stayed open for a long time. And somewhere deep inside, under the layers of fear and distrust, a tiny spark of hope began to burn. Learning what freedom means, the next morning came with the smell of something warm. The alien girl opened her eyes to see the human crouch near a small heater, cooking a pot of thick soup. Steam curled in the air, carrying the scent of herbs. She had never tasted before. He glanced at her and said, "You're up, come eat." She sat cautiously. Her chains gone, but her mind still shackled. She half expected him to take the food away before she could touch it. But he didn't. He filled a small bowl and handed it to her. The soup was hot, and she almost burned her tongue. Still, she ate, slow at first, then faster when she realized he wasn't watching her like prey when she finished. She looked at him across the table. "You don't ask anything for this?" she said, her voice low. He shook his head. "Food is not a price, it's what people share." The words made no sense to her, but they stayed in her mind like a stone dropped into still water. They spent the day at the hangar. The human worked on the ship's controls while she sat on a crate. Her eyes wandered to the open door of the hangar. Where the city streets stretched out, no guard blocked her path, no weapon pointed at her. She could run. The thought filled her with both fear and longing. She stood slowly, taking a step toward the light. The human didn't stop her. Didn't even look up. She walked outside, the sunlight hitting her face. The streets were busy, full of shouts and the clatter of carts, but the noise made her chest tighten. She remembered the market, the chains, the way eyes had stripped her bare. Her steps slowed until she turned back toward the hangar. The human was still at work. He didn't ask where she had gone. He didn't need to. Her return was answer enough. Later, he brought her into the city. They walked side by side, drawing curious glances. She kept expecting someone to grab her, to drag her back. But no one dared while the human was there. He bought supplies, tools, water filters, a small bag of dried fruit. When he handed her a piece, she held it in her hand for a long moment before eating. It was sweet, so sweet it made her eyes sting. That evening, rain began to fall. They took shelter under a narrow awning near the docks. She watched people hurry past, their faces hidden under hoods. The human stood quietly beside her, the sound of rain filling the silence. Finally, she asked, "Why did you buy me?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was calm but firm. "Because no one else saw you." The words hit her harder than she expected. She turned her face away so he wouldn't see her eyes. For years, she had been seen only as a body, a weight, a price. Now, someone claimed to really see her. And she didn't know how to handle it. Back at the hangar, she found herself wanting to help. She brought him tools when he asked, wiped down panels, and even managed to fit a cable through a narrow slot he couldn't reach when she handed it to him. He gave a small nod of approval. It wasn't much, but it made her chest feel warm. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat in the cabin, staring out at the dim lights of the city through the open hatch. The ship smelled faintly of oil and metal, but it was clean, hers now, in a way. Her fingers brushed over the blanket he had given her. Soft, warm, hers alone. The thought felt dangerous, because if it was hers, it could be taken away in the distance. She could hear voices outside the hangar, men talking in low tones. Her heart began to race. She crept to the hatch and saw two figures leaning against the wall. One of them whispered, "That's the one the human took from the market, worth a fortune if we return her." She backed away, her hands shaking. Her mind screamed to run, to hide. But her feet carried her to the human instead. He was asleep on the floor near the engine room. She knelt and shook his shoulder, whispering, "They're here. For me." His eyes opened instantly, sharp and alert, without hesitation. He reached for his weapon and stood. "Stay inside," he told her. She froze in the cabin doorway, and for the first time, she realized that maybe he wasn't the one she needed to fear. The past she tried to forget. The rain had not stopped all night. It tapped against the ship's metal hull. a soft rhythm that made the hangar feel both safe and trapped at the same time. The alien girl sat on the edge of her narrow bed, the blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. She had not slept, not after the voices outside the hangar, not after the human chased the men away with nothing more than a warning in his steady, cold tone. Now, in the quiet, the memories came. They came like shadows, slow at first. Then, all at once, she tried to push them back. But they were stronger. Her fingers dug into the blanket as the images played in her mind. She saw the day it happened, the day they came for her. Her home had been full of light and voices. Her people were traders, peaceful ones. But the slavers came at night. She had been sleeping when the door was kicked in. The screams of her family still echoed. In her ears, she remembered being dragged outside, her wrists bound so tightly the skin broke. A sack thrown over her head, her world turned to darkness. She was tossed into a metal container with others, some younger, some older. The air was hot, heavy, full of fear. They were taken to the first market. It was not as big as the one that human found her in, but the cruelty was the same. Traders shouted numbers, pulling her forward. She was weighed in front of strangers, her body a number. Her life a price. They called her product, never by her name, and each time she was sold. The price was lower, until finally she was bought not for work, not for skill, but for pleasure value. Her voice trembled as she spoke. She hadn't meant to say any of it, but the human had been sitting across from her, working on a control panel, and something in the way he listened without interrupting made the words spill out. When she finished, there was silence, only the sound of the rain. The human's jaw was tight, his hands still. For a moment, she wondered if he would say nothing. Then he spoke, his voice low but certain. "You will never be treated like that again." The promise sounded dangerous, like the kind of words that invite trouble. She almost wanted to tell him not to say such things, but a part of her clung to them, like a drowning person clings to a rope thrown in the dark. "You can't stop them," she whispered. "They always find me." He met her eyes, and there was no doubt in his. "Then they'll have to go through me." She looked away quickly, afraid of the feeling rising in her chest. It was heavy, strange, part fear, part warmth. It had been so long since anyone had stood between her and danger, so long since anyone had wanted to. That night the hangar felt different. The sound of his tools was steady, calming. She lay down and pulled the blanket over her head. But instead of the market, instead of chains, her mind held on to the sound of his voice. In the middle of the night, she woke to find the ship's lights dim. The human was asleep in the chair near the hatch, his weapon resting across his lap. It was a guard's position. He had stayed there to keep watch. For her, the realization made her chest ache. No one had ever lost sleep for her safety before. She went back to bed, but the fear that had followed her for years was weaker that night. It didn't vanish, but it no longer ruled her, and for the first time, she wondered what her life could be if she truly was free. The threat returns. The rain had stopped by morning, but the air still smelled of wet metal and dust. The alien girl was sitting inside the ship, folding the blanket neatly on her bed. She didn't know why she bothered, maybe because for once, she had something worth keeping tidy. The human was outside, speaking to a fuel supplier, arranging their departure for the next day through the narrow window of the cabin. She watched the hangar doors. Her stomach tightened when she saw shadows moving just beyond the light. At first, she thought they were dock workers, but then she caught the glint of weapons. Three figures stepped inside, and her blood went cold. They were the same kind of men she had seen in the market, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp with greed. One of them smirked when he saw her. "There she is," he said, "worth more than this whole ship." Another laughed. "The boss will pay triple to have her back, live or not." Her chest tightened. They had come for her. just like she always feared, before she could move. The human's voice came from behind them. "You took a wrong turn," he said, calm but sharp. The men turned, surprised. One raised his weapon, but the human didn't flinch. The fight happened fast. The first attacker lunged, and the human slammed his forearm into the man's wrist, twisting the weapon free. The second came from the side. Swinging a metal pipe, the human ducked and drove his shoulder into the man's ribs, sending him crashing to the floor. The third tried to grab the girl, but she backed into the cabin, her hands gripping the doorframe. "Stay there." The human shouted without looking back. She watched, frozen. As he took a punch to the jaw but didn't fall, blood ran from his lip. But his movements stayed precise, controlled. He fought not like a man trying to win a brawl, but like someone protecting something that mattered more than his own body. Every strike was meant to keep them away from her. One of the attackers pulled a knife. The human blocked the swing, but the blade grazed his arm. She gasped, her whole body tense. He didn't even look at the wound. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted until the knife clattered to the floor, and kicked it away. The attackers, realizing they were losing, backed toward the hangar doors. "This isn't over," one snarled. The human stepped forward, weapon in hand now. "It is for you," he said. His voice low, the men slipped out into the shadows, their footsteps fading. For a moment, the hangar was silent, except for the sound of the human's breathing. He turned toward her, his lips still bleeding, the cut on his arm already soaking through his sleeve. She rushed to him without thinking. "You're hurt," she said, her hands hovering near the wound, unsure if she was allowed to touch him. "I've had worse," he replied, though his voice was softer now. He sat down on the steps of the ship, and she knelt beside him. Her fingers worked quickly, tearing a strip from an old rag to wrap his arm. She tried not to shake, but her hands betrayed her. "You could have been killed," she whispered. He met her eyes. "So could you." The weight of those words pressed into her chest. No one had ever fought for her before. No one had ever taken a wound for her. She didn't know how to thank him. There were no words for it. Instead, she tied the last knot in the bandage and stepped back. But inside, something shifted. The fear she had felt since the market was still there, but now it shared space with something new, trust, fragile but real. That night, neither of them slept much. He kept watch by the hangar door, his weapon close. She lay in the cabin, listening to the quiet hum of the ship's systems. Every so often, she looked toward him. The man who had bled for her. The man who saw her as more than a price. The escape plan. The morning light crept into the hangar like a thief. The alien girl sat in the ship's narrow cabin, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had not slept. Every sound outside made her heart jump. Every shadow made her think of the men from the night before. The human entered, carrying a small crate. "We leave tonight," he said simply. Her breath caught. Those words sounded like freedom, but they also sounded like danger. "Is it safe?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not even close, but staying is worse." They spent the day preparing. The human moved with purpose, checking the ship's fuel lines, calibrating the controls, sealing every panel. She helped in small ways, passing tools, holding lights, fetching water. He didn't treat her like she was in the way. He explained what each part did, his voice steady even when his hands worked fast. At one point, she caught him wincing at the cut on his arm. "You should rest," she said. "No time," he replied, not looking up. The urgency in his tone told her everything he knew. They would come again, and soon. By midday, the hum of activity in the city seemed to shift. She could feel it, the way you can feel a storm before it breaks, from the open hangar door. She saw strangers moving in small groups. Some wore plain clothes, but their eyes were too alert, too focused. Hunters, they were watching the port, waiting for the right moment to strike. Inside, The humans spread out a small map of the city and the surrounding airspace. "We can't use the main launch lane, they'll be expecting that," he said, tracing a finger toward a narrow canyon just beyond the docks. "There's an emergency. Exit route for supply. Ship sits tight, but the sensors are weak there. And if we're caught?" She asked quietly. "Then we fight," he said, his tone leaving no room for fear. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. They loaded the ship with only the bare essentials: fuel, food, a few tools. She noticed he left behind heavier supplies. Even things that looked valuable. When she asked why, he said, "Weight slows us down, speed keeps us alive." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the hangar shadows grew longer. The air felt heavier, like the city was holding its breath. The human closed the hangar door halfway, leaving just enough space for them to move quickly. When the time came, he sat beside her in the cabin, checking his weapon. "You're scared," he said, not as a question, but as a fact. "Yes," she admitted. "Good," he replied. "Fear keeps you sharp. But don't let it own you." They waited for nightfall. She could hear distant voices in the street outside, the faint rumble of transport engines. Every sound seemed louder than it should be. Her hands twisted in her lap until the human reached over, placing his hand gently over hers. "Breathe," he said. She did, slowly, until her heartbeat began to steady. When the first stars appeared in the sky, he stood. "It's time." The engines came to life with a low growl. The hangar door rose, revealing the dark, quiet dock beyond. For a moment, everything was still. Then movement. 3 figures stepped from the shadows, weapons in hand. Her breath caught, but the human didn't slow. He pushed the ship forward, the landing gear rolling across the floor. The hunter shouted, running toward them, "Go inside." He barked, and she obeyed without thinking. The ship's hatch sealed behind her, the cabin lights flickering as the engines roared to full power. She felt the deck vibrate beneath her feet from the small viewport. She saw the hunters raising their weapons. Flashes of light cut through the night as blaster shots streaked toward them. The human weaved the ship sideways, the blasts hitting the walls of the dock instead. The canyon loomed ahead, a dark, jagged gap barely wide enough for the ship. She gripped the seat so tightly her fingers ached. The engines screamed as they shot into the narrow pass. The rock walls flew past on either side, close enough that a single wrong move would tear the ship apart. Behind them, the glow of pursuing ships appeared. "They're following?" she cried. "I know," the human said, his voice steady but his eyes sharp. "Hold on." Worth more than the galaxy, the canyon walls flashed past in a blur of shadow and stone. The alien girl's breath came in quick bursts. Her hands locked around the armrests. Behind them, the glow of pursuing ships grew brighter. The hunters were faster than she expected, and they weren't afraid to fire inside the narrow pass. Bolts of light streaked past the viewport. One grazed the ship's side, sending sparks across the console. The human's hands gripped the controls firmly, his eyes never leaving the twisting path ahead. "Hold together," he muttered, not to her, but to the ship. Then, louder, "Brace." He angled sharply, the ship tilting sideways to squeeze through a gap in the canyon. The pursuing ships tried to follow, but one clipped the rock wall and exploded in a burst of fire. The shockwave rattled their hull. She gasped, but the human pushed forward. 2 more ships remained, their weapons still locked on them. The canyon began to open into a stretch of open sky. Freedom was close for the hunters to let them go. "They'll try to disable our engines," he said, his voice calm but quick. "What do we do?" she asked. "We make them choose," he replied, as they burst into the open. He cut the ship hard to the right, diving low toward the surface of a dry salt plain. The hunters followed, but now their formation was broken. He flipped a switch on the console, arming something beneath the hull. "Hold on tight," he warned. She grabbed the seat, her heart pounding when the hunters drew closer. He triggered the release. A cluster of small metallic charges dropped from the ship and scattered across the plain. The first pursuing ship hit. The explosion lit up the sky and sent debris raining down. The second swerved violently to avoid the same fate, losing precious speed. The human seized the chance and punched the throttle. The engines roared, pulling them away into the night. The stars spread out before them endless. But she couldn't relax. Not yet. They won't. "Stop," she whispered. "Maybe not," he said, "but they won't find us where we're going." She looked at him, really looked. His face was marked with exhaustion, his arms still bandaged from the last fight. He had every reason to let her go, to abandon her and save himself. But he hadn't. He had bled, fought, and risked his life for her. Why? She asked again, the same question she had asked before. His answer came without hesitation. "Because you're worth more than they can ever afford." The words struck deep. For years, her value had been measured in weight, in flesh, in cruel. Whispers now, for the first time, her worth was something no one could put a price on. Silence filled the cabin, but it wasn't the heavy silence of fear. It was lighter like air after a storm. She turned to the viewport. The stars reflecting in her eyes. Her life was still uncertain, but for the first time, it was hers. The human adjusted the course, steering toward a cluster of distant lights in other system. "Another chance, you can go anywhere," he said quietly. "When we get there, you'll be free to choose." She studied him for a long moment, and, "If I choose to stay?" she asked. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Then I'd be the lucky one." Her chest tightened not with fear this time, but with something she couldn't yet name. She turned back to the stars, letting the warmth of that thought settle inside her. The ship moved steadily through the darkness, its engines humming like a heartbeat. Behind them, the world that had caged her faded into nothing. Ahead, a galaxy waited, vast and full of unknowns. She took a deep breath. For the first time in years, it didn't hurt. Freedom, she realized, wasn't just about escaping chains. It was about someone seeing you not as a thing, not as a price but as a person, and she had found that, against all odds. The human reached over and switched off the last warning light on the console. "All clear," he said. She smiled, small but real, and together they disappeared into the stars.